Good morning and welcome to the Sunday service. We will meditate few minutes. Sudodha is going to lead the loving kindness meditation right now.
Let's get into a comfortable position. Close our eyes and take 3 long, deep breaths. And now let's develop, cultivate metta, loving kindness, goodwill, beginning with ourselves. This is a sincere wish, a wholesome desire for our true and lasting happiness. We might think to ourselves, may I be happy, may I be peaceful, may I be free from stress and pain, free from suffering. May I live with a heart and mind unburdened by greed, by aversion, by delusion. May I look after myself with ease. And then we extend our loving kindness, our goodwill to our family, our friends, our mentors, teachers, and guides, all those that we love, all those that we admire, all those that we respect. May they also be happy, peaceful, free from stress and pain, free from suffering. May they live with hearts and minds unburdened by greed, by aversion, by delusion. May they look after themselves with ease. And then we extend our goodwill to our acquaintances, those that we like but don't know so well. May they also be happy and peaceful and free from stress and pain, free from suffering. May they live with hearts and minds unburdened by greed, by aversion, by delusion. May they look after themselves with ease. And we extend our loving kindness, our goodwill to those that we have difficulty getting along with, those that we have difficulty admiring or respecting, even those that may call us enemy. May they also be happy and peaceful and free from stress and pain, free from suffering. May they live with hearts and minds unburdened by greed, by aversion, by delusion. May they look after themselves with ease. And it is in this spirit of admirable friendship with all beings that we extend our loving kindness, our goodwill in all directions, in front of us, behind us, to the right and left, above and below, outward to all sentient beings everywhere. May we all be happy. May we all be peaceful. May we all be free from stress and pain, free from suffering. May we all have hearts and minds unburdened by greed, by aversion, by delusion. May we all look after ourselves with ease. And so now, with our hearts and minds uplifted with the loving kindness, the goodwill that we have cultivated, let us now turn our attention to the breath. Ardent, alert, mindful, setting aside greed and distress with reference to the world. we turn our full attention to the breath coming in, to the breath going out. Becoming acquainted with the kind of breathing happening right now. Whether the breath be long or short, deep or shallow. We might find it useful to ask ourselves what kind of breathing would be satisfying right now, and see how the body responds, creating a stable place for the mind to rest, not pulled into thoughts of the past, nor thoughts of the future, not pulled into fears or fantasies. But right here in the present moment, using the breath to unify body and heart and mind. In this sole occupation of mindfulness of breathing. So let us continue to meditate in this way, mindful of the breath, until we hear the bell.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. You see that today, I want to say something about last Sunday. Last Sunday we have almost 10 monks here and a lot of people here, a lot of food. We have a good time, enjoying, everybody's happily talking, eating, getting blessing, everything. Today, look at only few monks and few people. That's the way it is. Don't worry about that. Last Sunday is like that. Today all the monks, they went somewhere else for Vesak celebration. We have still Vesak celebrating different temple. Last night there were all the monks and Sudodha and myself. We are in Anaheim. Over 600 people there. Over 600 people. Everybody getting a good food there also. Evening around, I think around 9:30. It's a little late, but it's still there. We came back to the IBMC last night around 12:30 and we went to sleep like 1:30. Anyway, so that's I want to share. Sharing those kind of good thing. It's not the gossip. It's a good thing. Sharing is called some kind of meritorial activities. In Buddhism, we teach 10 kind of meritorial activities. One is sharing those kind of good activities. Like let's see, I went to the India, I went to the Bodh Gaya, I went to the Lumbini, Buddha's birthplace. When I say to somebody about his story, they are happy. I'm happy also. Happiness is the most important. So that's why I mentioned that things, last Sunday again, I want to say thank you for all the monks and all the people who participate and bring a lot of food or a lot of people. I want to say thank you for everybody, and we have very good Vesak celebration last Sunday. Right now, Sudodha is going to give a Dhamma talks. Sudodha, you can start your Dhamma talk right now.
Thank you, Bhante. I pay homage to the Buddha. I pay homage to the Dhamma. I pay homage to the Sangha. So recently I came across a quote, and for the life of me, I can't remember exactly where I found this quote. It's somewhere on the internet. I don't know. And it's by Charles Bukowski, and it says, "Sadness is caused by intelligence. The more you understand certain things, the more you wish you didn't understand them." And when I find any kind of quote online and I save them, I tend to save them for one of two reasons. Either I think they're saying something really profound and useful, and sometimes because I think that they're quite missing the mark. And this is kind of in that second category. I don't actually even know if this is a real Bukowski quote, but it kind of sounds like one. I'm sure that there are certain realms of knowledge or understanding where that may even be true. Case in point, when I was a little kid, and even now, I was a big fan of I Love Lucy, one of my favorite shows growing up as a kid. And, I think part of why I liked it when I was a child was because, it was a show with a Hispanic father and a Caucasian white American mother and little Ricky, right? But before that, it was about just a married couple. But, that reflected my own household. My father is from Colombia. My mother is like a mixture of European that's been here since like the 1600s. We've even traced our family history all the way back. So they've been in the United States for a long time, even well before they were the United States. And so I think I enjoyed the show because, wow, it looks like my own household. And over the years, I've learned more about the private lives of both, Desi Arnaz and Lucille Ball that probably, like that quote, left me wishing I knew less. But I'm happy to report that when we talk about the Buddha and the Dhamma, and we're talking about the kind of knowledge and understanding and wisdom we develop on the path, we're not talking about that kind of knowledge or understanding. We're talking about something that truly does lead to happiness, and not in some far-flung future, but the moment we start putting it into practice. It's quite well known and often repeated that the Buddha said that the Dhamma practiced is good in the beginning, good in the middle, good in the end, or admirable in the beginning, middle, and end. And that's certainly been my experience and the experience of many others, that as we develop on this path, we find a path that is making us happier, more clear-minded, more generous, more compassionate, and so on. And I suppose it's only natural that over time, as we start developing that and feeling that way, we want to share it with others. We want to spread it around. And then we start asking ourselves that question of, what does it mean to use Buddhism to help others? And that is something that I've given a lot of thought to as I've worked my way through life. Some people know that for a time I was considering becoming a psychotherapist, and so I diligently put myself into grad school and was taking courses on psychology and learning all kinds of really interesting stuff. And then became dismayed as I began to realize that the current psychotherapeutic model is oftentimes constrained by the medical model, and everyone wants quick and short and supposedly effective treatments, and it's all about diagnosis and what's wrong with the person and how to cure them and so on. And I became a bit disappointed in what I was learning would be my role as a psychotherapist if I wanted like really good, consistent work and not being my own boss. And even if I were my own boss, how to deal with insurance and a bunch of nonsense like that. So I thought, I know what I'll do. I'll go be a Buddhist chaplain instead. And so I switched programs and went into the chaplaincy program. And I ended up completing my Master of Divinity, which is, in some ways a Master of Buddhist Ministry, but it's, a Master's in Buddhist Chaplaincy. And chaplaincy is just ministry that you do outside of the temple. And even in that, I found a weird sort of constrained position for a lot of chaplains, which is, if you're a Buddhist chaplain at least, you're in this weird situation where, again, you're sort of forced into the medical model, especially if you end up working in a hospital, which most chaplains do, and it doesn't quite work, or you end up in the military, and then you're constrained by the military. But then you also have this other weird position that as a Buddhist chaplain, you just end up being an interfaith chaplain, because you kind of take on all the stuff all the Christian chaplains don't want to do because of whatever convictions they have. They just don't want to do certain things. Like, well, throw the Buddhist in there, he'll do it. And, you end up in these weird positions. And, I ended up feeling really disheartened by that as well. And I thought, okay, I'll just be a Buddhist scholar and I'll find another way to help people, maybe just through sharing the Dharma. And so far it seems to be working out. But, tomorrow I'm also going to catch up with a good friend who did get into chaplaincy and is doing some really hard work. The last time we actually talked, he had just gotten a job working in a children's hospice, so like palliative care for dying children. So I'll learn tomorrow what that's been like for him, and I can't imagine it's been easy. But all of this came up because I think it was about a month ago that someone came here to the temple and asked a really interesting question. This is someone who works for the suicide hotline, and asked, like, well, how do you apply Buddhism to that? Like, what Buddhist teaching or method or technique do you offer up to those in that kind of crisis? And so I've been mulling it over again, like what it means to help others as a Buddhist. And I was reminded of this one sutta that it's probably one of my favorites because it's the Buddha talking about what it means to be a teacher, and he has someone come up to him who says, you're this big, compassionate teacher that teaches everyone, and like, how is it that you teach everyone in the same way, you treat everyone in the same way? And so the Buddha lays out a way in which he is indeed teaching the same, but with slightly different motivations and certain ways he views different communities. And he breaks it down with basically two examples. One of a farmer with 3 kinds of fields, and one a homeowner with 3 types of water jars. And with the fields, you have a farmer who has an excellent field, a middling field, and a really poor field, right? And the excellent field, the Buddha says, that's the one you're going to plant first. You're going to go in there, you're going to plant a bunch of stuff, you're going to do a lot of work there, and then you'll go to the middling field. And then if you've got the time, you might go to the poor field and start planting some stuff. And he likens the really excellent field to his community of monks and nuns. The middling field he likens to his lay devotees. And the poor field, basically people who aren't really interested in Buddhism, but sometimes come up to him and ask him for advice. And with each one, the motivations are different. He says, well, with the monks and nuns, they have taken me as a refuge. They have taken me as an island. So I try to teach them the true Dharma that's good in the beginning, good in the middle, good in the end. And with the lay disciples, the middling field, he says the same thing. Well, they've taken me as a refuge, they've taken me as an island, and so I'm going to teach them the holy life, the excellent way that's good in the beginning, good in the middle, good in the end. And then when he gets to the poor field, he says, well, I might just say something that helps. But he still says, I'm teaching them the true Dharma that's good in the beginning, good in the middle, good in the end. So he's still teaching everyone the same thing, but he does view them differently in regard to how much they'll retain or maybe how much they'll produce. In other words, what they're going to put into practice, what they learn from him, and then what they apply. And I think this is even more obvious when you look at the other example of the water jars. There's a good water jar that's sealed nice and tight. You put water in, water stays until you pour the water out. That's the monks and nuns. There's another jar. There's no leak, but it's not sealed properly. So you fill it with water, and then water slowly over time kind of seeps out of it, right? Just kind of, it's porous, and so water eventually finds its way out. And then the poor water jar has a big crack in it. So it'll hold water for a while, but it's just all kind of going to seep out through the cracks. And so again, we have to think about it in terms of what's going to be retained and how well, right? And what's going to be put into practice and how well. And so, on reflecting that, I was reminded of a situation I witnessed. I suppose I was studying with my own teacher, and it was a big group of us, or not really a big group, but a group of us. And I don't even remember what my teacher was talking about, but there was this layperson there who then decided to kind of jump in and say, hey, yeah, this is really interesting. We're talking about this and this and this, but I don't really see how this in any way is concerned with the Four Noble Truths. And the room went silent, and my teacher looked at this student and didn't say a word, and then eventually just moved on. And, if you're not aware, the Four Noble Truths are part of what the Buddha determined as his categorical teachings, right? Part of his categorical teachings, meaning that they're always true and or always applicable, meaning that in this grand scheme of things, regardless of what we're talking about in Buddhism, it always relates back to the Four Noble Truths. And so for this person to say this, they would have had to completely miss the point. And so it's sort of like someone taking a lot of time to do due diligence in teaching someone a recipe for scones. The measurements, what goes in and everything, and this is how you cut them, this is how you put them in the oven, this is the temperature. And they say, yeah, but I don't really understand how this relates to baking. So I suppose sometimes I can sort of see how us lay people might be more like the middling field or the jar that kind of seeps stuff out. Because this was a student who took a lot of pride in like being able to travel and practice with this Tayajan and that Tayajan and put up pictures of himself with various monks on Facebook and whatever, and then he asked something like that after years of study, and it doesn't reflect well on what he's been retaining and putting into practice. And I don't share that to, make fun of the guy, but more to illustrate a certain point, which means, that we can have excellent teachers, we can even be excellent teachers, and we can even have great intentions on helping others with the Dharma, but we are not in control of other people, what they retain, what they put into practice, and so we just do our best. And that's really all that I've been thinking about in terms of what it means to help and be helpful. We're not in control of others, and this actually reminds me of another story that comes out of the canon, which I think is poignant because it really highlights this. It's the story of the acrobats, and I don't know if everyone knows this one, but it's one of my favorite ones, partially because it has such a weird name for one of the characters. There's one acrobat, and then he has his assistant, and for some reason his assistant's name is Frying Pan. I don't know why, but that's what we have in the canon. You can look it up, and that's what her name is. But they're practicing, their routines, and like these are acrobats that like get up on these big high poles, and they're doing all these cool tricks on the poles up really high and everything. It's really dangerous stuff, and you can get hurt if you fall off these things. And in this story, the acrobat turns to his assistant, and he tells his assistant, okay, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to be in charge of everything that you do. Like, I'm going to be watching you like a hawk, and I'm going to correct any of your mistakes and do all that stuff. I'm going to be watching you and really be concerned with what you're doing. And then you also watch out for me. And then if we do that, we'll both be okay. And the acrobat's assistant goes, that's a terrible idea. You're going to be up there. I'm going to be down here. You're going to be doing this. You're going to be that. I'm going to be doing that. No. You look after yourself and what you're doing. Really being focused on what your actions are and how you're doing them. I will also watch out for myself, making sure I'm doing everything correctly. And if we're both doing things correctly, it'll work out as we watch out for ourselves. And after the Buddha tells this story, he says that, in that story, it's the acrobat's assistant that is correct. That ultimately what we need to be focused on is what we are thinking, what we are saying, and what we are doing. And if we do it well, It has ripple effects. If I'm doing things well and you're doing things well, our bases are covered. And of course, that's not where it ends. There are also other examples in the suttas where the Buddha talks about how when you help others, you help yourself. And when you help yourself, you help others. So there's the symbiosis going on there. Because of interconnectedness, because of the way we relate to each other, the way we live in community with each other, the things that we do for ourselves impact others, the things we do for others impact ourselves, and so on. But ultimately, we are still responsible for what we are doing. We can't control others. We can't change their minds. And so, I think back to what initially spawned this talk, which is how we help those who are in crisis. And what I find really fascinating after studying a bit of psychology, studying a lot of chaplaincy, and now spending quite a few years sharing the Dharma like this, is how much of helping others is not direct, certainly not through instruction. It's not handing over a set of lessons. It's not handing over a technique, Certainly not when it comes to the Dharma. The Dharma, it's strange because in our modern society, we're so afraid of the Dharma being religious that we want to make it science. And since it's related to the mind, we want to make it science of the mind. We basically try to turn Buddhism into psychotherapy, but it ends up going in really weird directions. I find it really strange that in a period of maybe a month or 2 months, I've heard 2 different teachers give guest lectures at different places, and both times they related to the Dharma and the practice of meditation in a way that I find really troubling. In one instance, someone saying that meditation will cure people of their depression and anxiety and other kinds of things like that, so they don't need to take any medications. But something that I heard recently that I thought was really scary was someone saying that you can meditate and cure your cancer. And so, the thing is we want to say that meditation and at large the Buddhist path, the Eightfold Path, is helpful, but we need to be clear about in which way it is helpful. One of the ways I like to pull from the canon is the Buddha's example of 2 arrows. There's the arrow that life gives you of old age, sickness, and death. The fact of our mortality, the fact of having a body, all that goes with it. And there's this second arrow that's struck when our mind gets caught up in greed and distress with reference to the world, the very things I bring up in my meditation instructions, which also come from the canon. We become dismayed with the world, we become dismayed with the way things are, we, like Bukowski there, get super bummed out and decide we're going to bum out everyone else too. And that's second arrow that's striking us. And the first arrow, there's not much we can do on a physiological level, but that second arrow, because it's created, self-made, we can do something about that. But only us individually. One of the things that I found really, encouraging, I suppose, in studying psychotherapy and chaplaincy was the idea that when you're sitting beside someone in crisis, in that moment, you don't get to be the expert of what's happening to them, right? When someone's suffering, you don't get to be an obnoxious Buddhist and say, well, suffering is actually an illusion, and so is your body and your mind, and you think you're this person going through this. I can't think of anything less helpful in that moment when someone's really going through crisis, when someone's really hurting. When they're hurting, their suffering is real, and you have to treat it as real. And so what you have to be in that moment is not a teacher, but to do the other things that the Buddha did as a teacher. The Buddha didn't just instruct. The Buddha defined the way he taught in 4 ways. He instructed, yes, but he also encouraged, roused, urged, right? And so in those moments, we set aside instruction. We're not trying to teach people how to be, how to grieve, how to hurt. When I was studying psychotherapy, the methods that appealed to me the most were those existential methods of someone, say, like Irvin Yalom, who said to think of yourself more like a fellow traveler. The person going through it just needs someone there with them. And the funny thing is, the science actually tracks with that. Time and time again, we talk about this modality and this intervention and that thing. Time and time again, what ends up winning out, what really helps, is what they call the therapeutic alliance. It's just having someone there with you so that you're not alone as you go through what's causing you strife. When I was learning about what it meant to be a chaplain, we had a similar idea come up in a different way. There were a couple scholars writing on this that talked about it in the same way. They talked about it as companioning, which I think is a nice term for that as well. So how do you companion those that are grieving, those that are bereaved? How do you companion those that are dying of illness, sickness, whatever? So I like that idea of being a companion, right? Because that relates back to what the Buddha had to say about what the holy life, what the spiritual life is anyway. When we talk about a fellow traveler, when we talk about a companion, what are we talking about other than the very idea of being a spiritual friend, an admirable friend, being a kalyanamitta, which the Buddha said was the whole of the spiritual life, the holy life. So the best thing we can do when we find those suffering is to be a friend, to be a companion. And maybe at a certain time, when it's appropriate, they'll be open to whatever instructions, guidance we might have based off our own experiences, because we can't offer someone what we haven't experienced ourselves. But short of that, if we're setting an instruction aside, we have other things. We can urge them, we can rouse them, we can encourage them. In other words, inspire them. And there are so many ways that we can inspire those that are hurting. Right? And sometimes you inspire someone just by your presence, just by being there. Chaplains like to give it big, highfalutin words like pastoral presence. But I can guarantee you that if you have a friend in your life, a loved one, family, whatever, who's going through something tough and you are there, pastoral or not, you just need to be present. That's the way we can help. So, that's what I've been reflecting on, thinking on the Buddha, and one of the other examples I'll end with, which I think is really enlightening on this topic, is how the Buddha would know, okay, this is not how you teach directly, or rather, this is not a time when you teach directly. Now, this story doesn't come from the suttas themselves, it comes from one of the commentaries, but it's very popular and it ends up being confused with the suttas, but it's still, I think, a great example. In the commentaries, there's a story where a woman who is grieving the death of her son approaches the Buddha, still carrying her son actually, and she's not willing to accept that her son is dead. And she knows that the Buddha is a great teacher and a great master, and he's got all sorts of supernormal abilities, so for sure he'll have some solution. He'll be able to bring her son back from the dead. There'll be some kind of medicine, some kind of spell, some kind of thing that he can do. And so she comes up to the Buddha and says, "Save my son." And the Buddha looks at her and says, "I need you to bring me some mustard seeds." Now, that might not really strike home for us because you probably don't go into the pantry and find mustard seed. You probably find that container of that weird yellow stuff that'll stain your fingertips in your fridge, or if you're crazy, in your cabinet. I think mustard belongs in the fridge. It's a big debate in my household. My wife and I disagree on this. But you probably won't find mustard seed. But back in ancient India during the Buddha's lifetime, mustard seed was like him telling her, okay, your son is dead, you want me to perform some weird kind of magic? Okay, go down the street and try to find a house that has pepper, right? Or salt. And she goes, okay. And he goes, oh, hold on though. But you have to bring it from a house of a family who has never experienced death. And she says, okay, because she's not really thinking. She's too grieved. And so she starts going down the streets of this village, going door to door, talking to every family. And she says, hey, I need some mustard seeds. And they're like, sure. And she goes, hold on though. Has anyone in your family died? And they're like, yeah, of course. And she says, okay, well, I'm going to try the next house. She tries the next and the next and the next. And it eventually dawns on her, well, there isn't a single person in this village who hasn't been affected by death, who hasn't experienced death in some way. You know, whether they're be their great-grandparent, their grandparent, aunt, uncle, cousin, spouse, child, right? We've all known someone who has died. And if we haven't experienced it yet, we will. And she comes to the conclusion, oh, death is something that's part of the human condition. The Buddha didn't give some big discourse on death. He didn't give some big teaching on a philosophical level, on an existential level. Here's death and dying and how it works, and there's rebirth and there's this. He didn't give some big long list of anything. He just said, all right, well, go down the street and ask anyone you know if they've ever experienced death, right? Or have never experienced death, as the case may be. And so we can see ways that we might indirectly help someone, all right? I wouldn't recommend necessarily doing this. I think the Buddha was smart in knowing that this particular method would work on this particular person. But with each of us, there are often indirect ways that we can help inspire others, encourage others, and rouse others. In my own experience, that often just comes from just making sure that you are practicing whatever it is you might preach. So for those of us practicing the Eightfold Path, for those of us developing as disciples of the Buddha, it means doing the work that he put down for us as a path. You know, in terms of the Four Noble Truths, we are trying to comprehend stress and suffering. We are trying to end the causes of stress and suffering. We are trying to realize the end of stress and suffering, and we're developing the path that leads to that end. And if we do that diligently enough, truly put it into practice, then it means that we become a friend to ourselves, and it means we become a friend to others. And to put it in this grand scheme of helping others, we become a fellow traveler like Irvin Yalom encouraged, and like those chaplains who work with people going through all kinds of bereavement and pain. We learn how to companion. And ultimately what we're learning then is learning how to be a Kalyanamitta, a spiritual friend. So I think that that's how we use the Dhamma to help others, and how we use the Dhamma to help ourselves, because we're connected that way. All right. That's what I have to share today.
Thank you, Sudodha. Does anybody have any question, comment?
What was the teaching that was misunderstood by the student?
I don't remember. If I don't remember, it's because it wasn't something I was having difficulty with myself, or seemed pretty straightforward. I just remember we were just talking about matter of fact, totally makes sense to me, Dhamma. And then some guy's like, but how does this relate to Dhamma? And it's like, it's all Dhamma, dude. What do you mean? But like that kind of stuff happens. You know, people, you know, they don't quite see the connections, and that's fine. You know, I was using it as an example of what the Buddha called the middling field, or like the jar that's not sealed right, in the sense that I have, in the time I've been a student and in the time I've been a teacher, I have seen a lot of people just really not listen. And then years later ask something that, like, shouldn't you know by now? But for some reason they don't. And, you know, it's so interesting because when we look at what it means to develop the path, you know, like there are those for which, like, the path is both easy and quick. Like, think about some of the Buddhist disciples that heard one discourse and became full-on arhants. Not stream winners, not, you know, once returners, not non-returners, just, they were just, boom, awake, good, job done, right? And think about those that, like, struggled for a while. Like, think about, like, poor Ananda, that, like, the Buddha was gone, all the other monks are arhants and making fun of him and everything, and he's not even he's, like, sort of invited to the council, but they're, like, kind of, you know. And he barely manages to become fully awake, like right before the council is going to start, which, story-wise is wow, like that's like quite tense, But in any case, he's someone that, as far as we know, achieved full liberation after the Buddha had already passed. Then you have other people where the path is not quick, it's slow, but it's still easy. And then you have other people where the path is quick, but like very difficult. Like these are people who had to go through a lot of hardship before things made sense. You have students of the Buddha that had a lot of loved ones die. Their whole village was taken out by a flood, which can totally happen in India with monsoons and everything. All this stuff happens. They come to the Buddha just completely a wreck. He gives them some teachings. They become monks and nuns, and then they struggle and kind of fight for a bit, but it only takes like a few weeks, a couple months, maybe a year, and boom, right? So there's all kinds of ways that the path might unfold for us. It can be, easy and quick. It can be easy and long. It can be hard and quick, hard and long. And we probably don't want that last one. That sounds awful, right? But we don't really get to decide what that is. A lot of that's based on our past karma. Our present karma, the one we're in control of, also makes a big difference, though. So that's why we should practice diligently with real conviction and confidence, because it tends to make things easier. It's a lot harder to practice this stuff if you're kind of half in, half out. You got to give yourself fully to it, and it does turn things easier. Not easy. We talked about this in the meditation earlier this morning. The path itself is simple but not easy. But we can certainly make it easier when we really give ourselves to it. Yeah. So that's what came up for me. I wish I could remember what that guy totally missed, but I really feel it's, in this case, unimportant. At least it was to me at the time. Yeah. Anything else? Any other? Yeah.
I was just thinking in terms of the ability to be able to cultivate presence for somebody else who's in crisis. And the way meditation, I feel, really helps is because you're cultivating the ability to be present for yourself, and all your whatever's going on. And I found that really helpful, both as a therapist and as a parent, to be able to use meditation to cultivate that.
Yeah, I have a friend who's a Theravada monk, but was really inspired by some of the teachings by Thich Nhat Hanh about this kind of presence. To just have a positive regard for people, but really no need to say or do anything. You're just there as a listener, right? And so part of his chaplaincy work that he's putting into practice for the general public is these sessions that are not therapy. He's not using any modality. There's no intervention, and he's also not a licensed therapist. But it's just a session where people have someone they can talk to, and he will listen. And that's all he does. He's just quiet. He listens. He's just there, right? And so he becomes, for those people who take on this service with him, a confidant, And for some people, that's really all they need, In my own experience, there have been times when I just really needed someone to listen. And if I had known that there are people out there that will just listen, that would have been great. To help me connect with my own sense of agency, let's say. The idea that I have my own answers to my problems, that I don't need to go running to someone to try to solve things for me, but I still just need someone to hear me. So many of us just want to be heard, And so being an admirable friend is creating space to hear others, I think. Yeah.
And there's also that whole experience of co-regulation.
Mm-hmm.
So when a person is regulated themselves, automatically the other person's nervous system starts calming down and resonating as well.
Yeah, there's a term in psychotherapy for that, and I can't remember what it is. Modeling, I think, or something like.
Yeah.
It's something like that. But I know you're talking about.
It's co-regulation. In other words, a person's own interior, state actually affects the interior state of the person they're with.
Yeah.
So,
No, I agree with that. Yeah. With chaplains, I was referring to pastoral presence as well, and that's part of it too. If you're a calm presence when someone's losing it, you kind of help them calm down too, and you don't have to do anything more than just be calm yourself.
Which is a lot.
It is a lot. Yeah. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Subodha.
Sudodha,
Yes.
I found that your narrative and your examples really delivered a very complete lesson, and I thank you for that.
Oh, I'm glad. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. We are going to chant page 4 and page 10.
Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang saranam gacchami, Dhammam saranam gacchami, Sangham saranam gacchami. Sentient beings are numberless. I vow to save them all. Deluding passions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them all. Dharma gates are limitless. I vow to study them all. Buddha's way is supreme. I vow to attain it. May suffering ones be suffering free, and the fear-struck fearless be. May the grieving shed all grief, and the sick find health relief. When ye được công đức phổ cập ư nhân đi na đẳng từ chân sân nghe gai còn thái phà đạo. When ye được công đức phổ cập ư nhân đi na đẳng từ chân sân nghe gai còn thái phà đạo. When ye được công đức phổ cập ư nhân đi na đẳng từ chân sân nghe gai còn thái phà đạo. Mani Padme Hum.
Thank you again, and I think we have tea and cookies. Yes, tea and cookies. Thank you, Subodha. Thank you for everybody. Please come and join next week also. Next week, Ravan Kusal is going to give a Dhamma talk. 10 o'clock we have every Sunday, 10 o'clock we got meditation. Please come and join. I was thinking to do the meditation outside 10 o'clock to 10:45 near the Bodhi tree. I think the summertime is good place to meditate, except I don't know how clean they are because sometimes there are a lot of something going there with animals. Well, I hope somebody will clean it. All right, so thank you again. Please leave a contribution to temple, and I have some good news also. I will share it later sometime. Not today, some other days I will share some kind of good news for me, just for me, because I'm getting old, that's why. All right, thank you again. So please come and join with us again. By the power of the Buddha, Dhamma, and the Sangha, you all be well and happy. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. That me computer off color. All right.